Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the International Sports Forum of 2021. I'll be your moderator for today. I'm Cal Salem. I am also the chairman of the Board of Advisors for the association. The association started and was founded in 2020 with the goal of engaging the Canadian and the Arab Canadian community with sports locally and internationally. We aim towards making sure that everybody gets a fair chance to be seen, to be supported, as well as find their path to triumph and success in the sports fields, regardless of where they come from, where they're going to and which sport they specialize in. Our mission is to help the community have awareness and understand how they can have a healthy and engaging life with sports, with others who can also coach and assist them to advance their dream to where they want it to be. With that, during 2020 and up until this moment, we have done a lot to expedite the agenda of engaging the community as well as the international community with the the Arab Canadian Sport Association with multiple events, but we consider this to be one of the most distinguished above all. We welcome today many of the figures and the known people from around the world to shed a light on how their experience and engagement with the sport, whether on the athletic side, the industry, or the business side. It's going to be an exciting day for all of us. Let's enjoy it. I advise and I invite everybody to please participate. By the end of each session, we are going to have about 5 to 10 minutes to discuss any questions they might have. We welcome everyone to be active. We're starting with the first session here around structure of global sports. And our speakers is Mr. Malav Shroff. He's the president of Asia Sailing Association and executive board member of the World Olympian Association. Malav competed in the 49ers event at the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens. We also have Ms. Kristina Maksuti, a current football player of Fa'al in Norway and the Albanian national football team, former player in different leagues such as USA, Germany, Switzerland, Australia, besides other leagues as well. Welcome to the session. Thank you very much for offering us your time. I would like to start with a generic question to you, Mr. Malav, and to shed a light on how do you see the international sports movement these days going? What are your views on the involvement of athletes and how can they shape up their future and have an active part with that?
Yeah, thanks Carl, and hi everyone. I'll try and sort of start quite simply so that we can engage in a healthy discussion, and thanks Samir, truly appreciate to make me a part of this. If I can share a slide, if that's possible.
Of course.
So what I have done is, I've just put the whole world of sports as we see into very simple sort of areas. So when we look at the world of sports, there are 3 or 4 groups. One is, the Olympic sports and the non-Olympic sports. There are professionals and amateur sports. There are sports activities which are commercial, and there are sports activities which are for non-profit. And then the sport world as such is divided into, you do it for entertainment or you do it for health. And when we sort of discuss the world of sports, it's quite complex, and how we kind of discuss it depends on from which angle we are looking at it. So it's very different for an amateur non-profit person talking about sports who's primarily doing it for health reasons, compared to a fully professional athlete doing it for commercial reasons in a professional league. So although sport as a word is quite sort of generic, but it depends on where you kind of come to it, because the sport world is very, very large. So that's what I want to start in, that the structure of sports is quite complicated for someone not involved because of these parameters of where you are coming from. So I just wanted to have this slide to just simplify, when we talk about sports, where do we come from, in what angle? And that kind of makes it easier to understand how the sport structure is formed. Me being part of the World Olympians, the Olympic side of sports, as a lot of us know, is structured in a particular way, whereas the non-Olympic side is structured, every sport is structured in completely different ways. So I just have a very simple slide on how the Olympic side is structured. I've simplified it, it's quite complicated, but if you see the Olympic side of sports, under the International Olympic Committee, you have national Olympic committees, then you have the international federations all bunched in a group, both summer and winter, and then there are the World Olympians, the athletes. So then the National Olympic Committees itself has National Sports Federation under that and athletes under that. And if you then come to the core athletes, where we a lot of us belong, we kind of report to everyone. So we report to the national federations, we report to the international federations, we report to the Olympian bodies, we report to the IOC, the National Olympic Committees. So as far as athletes is concerned, the athlete is in middle of the whole gamut of different federations and associations and bodies, and kind of, some countries have it well structured, so the athlete doesn't have to go through the rigmarole of reporting to multiple structures. And in other countries, an athlete is running around between federations and associations and bodies. It's very, very different across the world, in different parts of the world, how we structure this. A strong sports like football, and probably Kristina will say, would have a very sort of straightforward structure of how an athlete plays a role in it. And other sports which are smaller Olympic sports, the athlete may go and report to multiple sort of bodies in their quest to sort of get into where they want to be. So I'll just leave it at that for now, and then Kristina, all yours on how you want to comment.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic slides, and credit to Mr. Shroff for kind of making that an easier process for people to understand, because the international sports movement, global sports movement, is very complicated and can be difficult to understand. But for me personally, I think you made a great point where football is such a global sport that the path for success or even just involvement is very structured and laid out. So luckily there's a system in place for me to get involved with, my federation, to then play in global tournaments with FIFA and the Euro Championship. But personally, I think if someone was to want to get involved, it would have to start with what they wanted to do in regards to the success that they wanted to garner, which path they would like to take, whether it be for, like Mr. Shroff pointed out, health benefits, or they were looking to move towards a more professional environment. I think that's something that I worked on early in my career, which is where I wanted to be playing. And I wanted to primarily play in Europe and to play global tournaments with FIFA and other ones. So I took steps into making that a priority where what kind of visas would I need? What kind of organizations did I need to be involved in? What kind of countries would suit my passport or, you know, my style? And for women especially, there's not a lot of guidance in that. So what I really had to focus on was if I wanted to make something work or to be a part of these organizations, I needed to do the majority of the research and the majority of the gathering of information to provide to either myself or a club or an agent. And I think those early steps are something that I've found to be invaluable, of basically just taking all these steps into, yeah, like I said, into my own hands to be a part of a national team. You know, I'm a dual citizen, so I wanted to be a part of like these world sports movements. So obtaining my Albanian passport and then, you know, breaking into a team and then playing in these global tournaments. And I think those kind of things are something that comes from, you know, just kind of understanding which side of athletics you want to be on. And the international sports movement is so vast that there's so many obstacles to overcome bar just playing the sports, such as what I mentioned of like visas and passports. So anyone wanting to get involved, I would say just figure out what you would want to do. And then if you don't have the help, it's possible to just figure out all the information on your own and then kind of move forward and move upwards with all that, if that
that's really
kind of
good.
makes sense.
Mr. Malav, from Kristina's experience, there should be and there would be a role for organizations surrounding the different or coming from the different types of engagements. How do you see the organizations playing that role, providing the guidance and setting the pace and the stage for international athletes to be successful, not just in one country, but in multiple countries, especially with dual citizens, which Canada has many of them. Many Canadians come from different origins. So what would your advice be? What would your vision for that be?
So I think for the Olympic sports, the rules are pretty straightforward, you know, how it's done. But for non-Olympic professional world, which is huge in terms of sports, every sport has different rules, and that's where the issues come. So you have rules from the sports federation, and then you have rules within the countries, and sometimes they don't sort of match, and that's where the issues for athletes begin, because then you have to sort of keep going between the two in terms of figuring out what the rules are. The international bodies can actually, you know, maybe sit together and formulate a plan of how dual citizens as athletes can make this into an easier transition. And you know, the IOC has a good connect with the UN, and it has to happen at an international level, because trying for an athlete to go between the different federations and different countries' immigration laws, it's not really easy, because they're playing, they're practicing, they're not supposed to be going around doing paperwork. But that's what ultimately lands up happening, because the rules are not clear cut. And yeah, that's one thing that international sports can do, formulate a global sort of rules in these areas, which will be very beneficial in the future.
Very interesting point. Do you think for athletes, and I'll open this for you, Kristina, as well, from your experience, it is important to have an agent or a manager to facilitate these administrative and more engaging operational aspects on your behalf? Or would you be able to do it on your own and get yourself to a point where I don't need a manager, I can actually do it, but I not have to spend time figuring that out? Which one would you think is the best way to go?
I can take this in the beginning. The the start of my career, I did not have an agent. And so it was not really like a choice of, should I have one? Should I not have one? It was more of, if I wanted to succeed, I would need to figure out this information. On the women's side, it's a bit more different. The men's side is more lucrative. So agents are saturated in the environment. And so they want to be a part of it. Whereas in the women's side, I felt that I was doing the work of an agent and then giving that work to someone to just facilitate for me. So I would say, speaking for women, in the beginning, I think, we're more maybe research based. So it's important to make sure you know the information, even yourself, but so you're qualified to understand what the agents are talking about. If you don't have an agent, can you go to the immigration? Can you research online for visas and permits? Because these are things that I wish I didn't have to spend time working on. Like Mr. Shroff said, I should be training and playing. But if you want to succeed, sometimes you will have to do these types of things. I'm at a point in my career where I have an amazing agency who says you don't have to do anything besides show up and go to training, and it's a blessing, and I'm very lucky. But I think that an athlete should be prepared to do both in case.
Thank you, Kristina. It actually makes this more interesting, and it just pops up the question that Mr. Malav, Mr. Shroff, do you think that the government should have an active role in this, or this should be more of an organization, industry-led approach? How would you suggest this becomes an easier journey for the athlete to make it to the target dream that they want to achieve?
So the ideal approach is for the government to do it, because they should look at athletes as ambassadors of their countries. That's the way it should happen. But for a lot of countries and governments, sports is not a priority. And that's where it starts and stops, right? Because if it's not a priority, they won't do it. And athletes then cannot suffer because the government does not make sports a priority. So in the end, it will come to the international sports federations to get this done, appoint agents, help athletes. If the federations are professional and run well, they would and should do it. Unfortunately, in sports world, there is a lot of voluntary organizations which are still, rightly or wrongly present. It's great to have volunteers in a lot of places doing work, but when you have volunteers, then you're not sure whether it will be done or not, because it depends on the time of the volunteer. So there are certain aspects of sports, like, the legal, immigration, the athlete, professional aspects, which have to be dealt with by professionals. And if you don't have a professional agency, a federation doesn't have, it's tough. I mean, then the athlete has to do it, and there's no choice. I mean, as Kristina said, athlete then has to be prepared to do both. And that's the way it is. So I think it's also luck, in a sense, where you are growing up, and your country or your federation, how professional it is, or how the priorities of that country are. And if you're lucky enough to be a part of the system which works, it's great. And if it's not, then more often than not, athletes will end up doing everything. Athlete, their parents, their friends, everyone is pulled in to be done. And that's what makes sports, unequal in one way, but exciting in another way, because there are stories of so many athletes having proved themselves despite of all the hardships, and you'll get stories from every country that, and they all will tell you the same thing, that despite of all the hurdles, we have achieved X, Y, and Z, and it's the same everywhere. And I think as we go into this digital world where information is so easy to transfer, I don't understand why this information is not freely available or more easier to sort of get to the athletes. It's just a matter of someone doing it properly in that sport. I mean, I think it's possible to help athletes in a way much better than what we are doing now in each sport.
As a follow-up question, do you think the type of sport as well might have an effect on that? Would it be easier for certain sports against others?
I think for sure, because big sports where there is a structure like football will have it a little bit easier than sports which are smaller and may not have a structure, because it all depends on how many professionals are hired in that sport to help athletes. So if you all fully voluntary based, it's going to be more difficult for that sport to go down the system and help. Whereas if you're a fully professional led sport, it'll be easier. Things will be more easier disseminated and kind of better for the athlete on the overall environment. And that's very evident to see in different sports. You know, it's not the same everywhere.
Absolutely. Kristina, reflecting on your experience, starting all over from the beginning, would you approach it differently?
I think that I wouldn't approach it differently. I think I didn't really have a lot of options. I think I was doing a lot of the work that I wish, like Mr. Shroff says, the government was doing, or making it a little bit more easier. I probably would have adhered some advice differently, maybe not have, like what Mr. Shroff said, use so many volunteers, other people wanting to get involved, like, you know, like parents or, you know, family members. It can be very oversaturated with opinions and everyone trying to pull from different places. So I might have just taken a more solitude approach and taken what I've maybe learned myself and then execute it, because luckily with football I have a very clear path, but in terms of the government and the regulations and the agents, and it can get very confusing and muddled. So from the beginning, I wouldn't change too many things. It ended up working out, thankfully, but I think I would probably do what Mr. Shroff said and then try and cut out as many of the outside factors as I could have, and I think the big takeaway is take your career into your own hands and do as much hands-on work for yourself as you can do until you can find a professional organization that you trust to then take over that aspect of your career.
Given that you're part of a team sport, do you think that team organization and their structure could affect your approach to work with other organizations outside of the league where you are? Like, it's a structured layer. How would you look at it from a challenge perspective?
Yeah, I think that being a part of team sport has a lot of positives. It also has its negatives as well. You are kind of, I remember, especially with the start of the coronavirus pandemic, you lose a bit of your identity when you play team sport. You forfeit, you know, what you wear, what you have to be in a uniform. You forfeit any individuality for the greater benefit of the team. If you feel a certain belief, it's not really necessary for what the team is doing. So I feel that maybe the older you get, the more mature you get, you feel like you want to go in a different direction, maybe publication wise or sponsorship wise. And, you know, it doesn't directly benefit the club that you're with or your team sport. So there's might be some friction. But I think most athletes on team sports play team sports because they enjoy being a part of a greater community. So they're able to sacrifice some of these individual aspects that maybe Olympians would benefit from, just because they enjoy the environment of the team sports.
Awesome. Mr. Shroff, if you are to offer an advice, some sort of a steps to follow for athletes to engage in a successful manner with organizations, what would your advice be?
I think the athletes can engage with the organizations in two aspects. One is during the athlete career and one is after. And they're very, very different. So during the athlete's career, it's pretty straight. You want to concentrate on your playing and your training and your competitions. And at that time, you know, you have to do whatever is needed. And it all depends on the organization. But you cannot make the structure and the organization an excuse for your non-performance, because it's not going to change. So during your athlete's career, I think the main task for an athlete is engage what is necessary to make sure that your performance does not suffer. Whereas once you have completed your sort of athletic life, and you want to then engage into an organization for administration or giving back approach, then it's very different, because then I think the first thing on your mind should be, as an advice, is that if you can make the life better for the next generation of athletes and make them not suffer what you went through, that's a good place to start, at least for me. In a sense, I went through these things where it could have been different, and therefore let me engage in the organization to change those parts. And if everyone sort of kind of does this and adds to the better running of that organization, I think you can take every organization to the next level, whether it's voluntary or professional. Because just because you have professionals hired doesn't mean that organization is running well. It depends on the caliber of that professional and the passion of that professional also. So I think adding something to the organization which then leads to the organization doing better for the athletes of the future, that's kind of my criteria or my benchmark. You leave the place better than what you came in. And yeah, I think keep it simple. I mean, don't complicate it too much, because the world of sports is already far too complicated. It's easier to just simplify it a little more than what it is.
It certainly requires that experience and that attention. Thank you for that. I would like, with the last 3 to 4 minutes that we have in our hands, to open it for questions from our audience. If you would like to participate with us, please go ahead. Does anyone have a question to ask Mr. Shroff or Kristina as well?
I can have a question for Kristina, if you don't mind, Khaled.
Please.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for being with us, Malav and Kristina. I'm really happy to have you, especially Kristina, first time to meet you. Malav, we were met in events, so we are in contact together since a long time. So Kristina, my questions to you, and what came to my mind, that when you are a professional athlete presenting or playing with a club, like a professional club, and at the same time there is a national team commitment from your country, ask you to represent the country at the same time, and there is like a mixed training schedule between both your club training and the national team training, especially with the team sports. You have to coordinate all the players together. They have to do the planning and all of that. I don't know how you can manage such a thing, especially in different countries. I don't know how you manage to do that. Can you give us like a highlight on that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. When it comes to balancing my national team with my club, it can be difficult, but luckily Mr. Shroff pointed out the World Organization for Football, FIFA, is very organized, it's very professional. So when you're playing in Europe, with international breaks where every club is mandatory to give off 2 weeks, where you have your games, your matches, your training camps. So it's very structured, and it might be more tiring to go from your club, you play a game on Saturday, you get in a plane, you're a national team for 2 weeks, you come back and there's no break, but there is no overlapping schedule. When I most recently played in the US Women's Professional League, they don't have those international breaks for national team players coordinating with Europe. So that was a bit difficult, and I had to talk to my club asking for permission to leave 1 week prior to be able to fulfill my commitment in Scotland for a match. And, so that was something that I was luckily able to do because the club was accommodating, but it is especially tricky now with Corona, with quarantine, and, there's different travel restrictions. So it's gotten a bit more complicated, which is why I chose to sign to play back in Europe in Norway, because
it's 10:30.
The FIFA system is a little bit more organized than the system here in the US in terms of coordinating for national teams. So it is complicated, but luckily there is a system in place for me to follow. So I have to just let FIFA do most of the work for me.
I have, sorry, Cal, I'm trying to send you a message I received from Ibrahim Seso. Question to Malav, but I couldn't forward it to the chat.
Okay, please go ahead. Yeah, be the proxy.
Sorry for that, but I couldn't forward it to you. However, a question to Malav from Ibrahim. His question, some sports do not have the setup for its athletes to compete at the club level, but rather only at national level. How do you see this impacting such sport in terms of recognition globally? And if I see here Ibrahim, he can discuss it directly with you. I don't know, Ibrahim. Yeah, here is Ibrahim. You can turn on the camera, Ibrahim, and you can jump in if you like. Okay, so Malav, I don't know if you get the question. Good.
Yeah, so from what I understood is if you don't have a club structure and you're only playing for the national team, then what's the well, if your country doesn't have a club structure and it only has a national team, then your only choice is to play for clubs in some other countries. There is no other choice, and then it depends on whether your country allows you to play that, and that depends on your national rules and the professional rule set up in your sports. So again, I mean, football is so well evolved that you can play for a club in any country and then you come back and play for your national team. And some clubs, some sports allow it, some sports don't allow it. And I think if the sport is popular in your country and there's no club structure, then maybe it's something good to start in terms of an athlete taking a lead to start a club league or a club championship. That's the way they all begin. You get a company, an events company or a sports company to start a clubs league in your own country, so you don't have to sort of go out. But the easiest way is to go to another country where there is a club league and start playing for that, and make sure that your country allows you to come back and play for your national team.
Thank you for that, Mr. Shroff. Ms. Kristina, we really appreciate the time you took to participate with us today. Such a rich and wonderful session. Thanks so much, and we'll move on now to the next.